I greet you with Jesus' joy, for it is in him that I live, breathe, move, and have my very being. I am delighted that you joined Unboxed on Purpose today, which is a podcast created for Favored by the Father Ministries. I am Barbara Arlene Fields Brehon, your host. Our featured guests usually share how they stepped outside of comfort zones to become unboxed. And boy, do I have a special treat for you today. We share experiences that lead to fulfillment of purpose. And I pray that every episode resonates with our audience and helps them to access their authentic destiny. Our guest today is none other than Dr. Joan Vernikos, and she is joining us from Culpeper, Virginia. God bless you. I'm going to add her to the stage now. Hello, Dr. Vernikos.
Hello.
I am so thrilled that you joined us today, and I'm going to give a slight background based on the bio that I clipped from here, there, and everywhere.
Thank you.
Dr. Vernikos is a vibrant 90-year-old former director of NASA. Told you I had a special treat for you today. Dr. Joan is a PhD and was born to Greek parents in Alexandria, Egypt. She is a pharmacologist from the University of London, taught medical students at Ohio State University. She's been recruited by NASA in 1964 and served as a former director of the life sciences of NASA. She's a recognized leader in the field of stress management, coping, and a pioneer of space medicine. A woman of many talents, she and her husband, Geoffrey, had a chocolate truffle shop. And I believe they invented the first all-white chocolate truffle in Europe. I read so many interesting things about this amazing woman, stories that challenge her recipes, and she'll tell us more about that if she chooses to. Her research in NASA check this out, guys, led to the discovery of a revolutionary link between gravity and healthy aging. And so in her first book in 2004, The G Connection, Harness Gravity and Reverse Aging, with a foreword by John Glenn, you heard me correctly. Her foreword to her book was by John Glenn, and it's published now in 5 languages. Oh, my. Another book that she wrote is called Stress Fitness for Seniors, that came in 2009. She says that sitting kills, moving heals, which is the name of yet another book in 2011. And I need to use that phrase more often. Sitting kills and moving steals, because I sit at this computer too much sometimes. The natural lifestyle that she leads is wonderful. I could say a whole lot more, but Dr. Joan, thank you so much for being here. You Hall of Famer, you International Astronautical Federation Hall of Fame. 90 years old and full of health, fun, and vigor. Talk to us, Dr. Joan Vernikos. How are you?
I don't know if I can live up to your description. I was awed.
Well, that's your life story, and I've left
myself. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I have left out a whole lot.
How lucky I've been. That's all I can say. That I have been so lucky. All my life, and very grateful. Gratitude is one thing my mother taught me. Everything we did was linked to being grateful. Grateful that my father worked and could put us through good college schools. Just gratitude every day for everything.
Gratitude for everything all the time. I want to tell our audience that the first time we met virtually, only a few days ago, I was in awe that, first of all, you said you were 90 years old. Secondly, I was in awe that I remember I interrupted you pruning your trees.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Would you tell us why you prune your trees yourself?
I say, why not? I mean, as long as I can reach it, that's my aim. If I can reach it and I can prune it, there's no reason to get somebody else to prune the tree. I mean, it's gardening. I like that sort of trying to keep the to the extent that I can the garden tidy. And it's the time of year that the leaves are falling, and it's time to get those branches back. So it'll bloom again next year.
This is absolutely wonderful. I'm giggling with God with every single syllable that you utter, Dr. Vernikos. We're talking about being unboxed today, and I'm going to give a whole lot of unboxed open mic to you. And so to get us started and go a little bit further, let's go all the way back to your childhood and let's talk about passions, because backstage we having a little chat about passions in life. Go back as far as you would like and talk to us about passions in life and tell our audience a little bit about your purpose and your identity. I'm going to sit backstage while you talk with us.
Interrupt me, please, when you're bored.
I'm not going to get bored.
don't want any yawning done on the other side of the world.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. Tell us, go back to your childhood in 10 years and talk to us about passion in life and maybe how you and I met, because they probably are fascinated with that part too. How in the world does Dr. Brehon know Dr. Vernikos?
Things happen in the world and in life. And, I learned very early on that I was better off if I just let them happen rather than struggle with them and fight them and try to change them. Because somehow or other, things that happened had a reason and may not have looked like the best idea at the time, but if I let it take its course, it worked out. And to this day, it never ceases to amaze me. Never ceases to amaze me. Not to mention the people I meet and out of the clear blue, and the comments I get, that I never, thought of myself in those ways. I was the younger of two girls, and my older sister, was much more assertive and than I was. I was sort of withdrawn, if you can believe that. And she had to go and register me at university, otherwise I would have never gone. My father wanted both of us to become doctors like himself, and she did. And I chickened out the first time I had to walk through the anatomy room. Instead, I took the second best, which was the School of Pharmacy, which was interesting because it was somewhat akin to cooking, mixing drugs and things like that in the days when you did that, rather than just sell things in a bottle. And I became interested in the people that came into the pharmacy shop and their story and what brought them in. And of course, I had heard my father give advice, medical advice, to his patients, and sometimes discuss things over dinner. So it was an environment that was full of curiosity and trying to solve this kind of problem. That we had to be grateful for our father being a doctor, grateful for being able to afford something, grateful for the friends we had. And it was a constant thing that never became boring. It just was interesting because it helped you pay attention to various people that she met and pointed out, and then we would look at them and learn from people, observe them. So it was that kind of environment. But this was the environment I grew up with. So it was fun, but it was educational. And, very, very lucky.
It sounds absolutely amazing, the kinds of things that you share from your very, very, very young age, and the
Yeah.
parents that you had, your sister, and how she uh, worked on you and taught us to learn herself. Who would you consider as your biggest influence in life?
Yeah. Well, I think my father was my biggest influence in life because his approach to medicine was to look at a person, talk to a person, ask them about irrelevant things to find out about them and what their problems were. And I found that that was a wonderful way to get to know people. I was shy by nature, but if you ask them about themselves, they were always, everybody is forthcoming. There isn't a soul who doesn't want to talk about themselves.
Isn't
You know,
that
even
amazing?
a,
So
absolute stranger.
I
If
love that.
somehow you can ask them about themselves
Uh-huh.
and what did they think of such and such, or and the shroud drops away, and and they become a human again that you can communicate with. So it was very, very interesting. Also, we would walk through the waiting room, and we had the experience of seeing who was there. Some people had been there before, patients. Others were there the first time and were nervous. So it was interesting to observe other people who are coming to be treated or to get help uh, in that environment in some way.
It is
So,
amazing how
yeah.
these little things aren't so little after all. Here we are talking about things that happened some years ago for you,
Oh,
but
yeah.
still you're using conversation to help other people even today. And so I'm thinking about some of the books that you've written and some of the experiences that you have had with so many people. You're working with NASA and all those kinds of things. So let's dump some more of those puzzle pieces out about stepping outside of a comfort zone or stepping outside of a box. Tell us about a couple of times where you think you stepped outside of a box and pursued something that was unexpected.
I was constantly doing it, so it's not that unusual for me. But I, as I said, I started in School of Pharmacy, and School of Pharmacy uh, didn't wasn't going very far, and I thought, and I was only 16, so I couldn't really go and, yeah, I could go and get a job at a pharmacy, but I mean, most people wouldn't look at me twice. And so I decided I wanted to go to London. And the reason I wanted to go to London was I went to an English school, and we used to collect uh, savings bonds during the war. And they would sell the students savings bonds, war bonds. And I had collected an amount, which probably wasn't a whole lot, but decided that I could afford to go to London on my savings bonds. I'm crazy, but that was the beginning of it. And I remember there was a whole family uh, council to decide whether I could or couldn't go to London by myself. And my mother was worried about prostitutes, and, and a girl going alone. And I didn't even know what a prostitute was. And, and that sort of conversation that was going on, how could I go alone to London? And I thought, well, I have the money, and of course it was ridiculous. I hardly had the money, but and then after I went to England, which was I went, they decided my degree from Egypt wasn't good enough, and I should repeat at least the final year of pharmacy. So I started doing that, and I had led a sheltered life. So suddenly I'm in London, it was a big city, with all kinds of crazy things that I had to do for myself.
That's a crazy thing in terms of stepping outside of your comfort, stepping outside of what you do. And you're saying that you stepping outside of a box is nothing unusual for you. So pursuing your ultimate purpose. And so as we travel a little bit further, getting into what you consider your ultimate purpose, what is that?
I want to help people, and in the way I think I can help, there are many ways you can help people, but I think the way I can help them is with my knowledge or my curiosity, more than my knowledge, my curiosity in finding out things. For instance, I was lucky enough to study pharmacology and also stress research, which deals with a lot of hormones and how you handle stress. And I had to speak about it. And then I got to teach at medical school, and I would have to explain to medical students about things I really didn't know much about. I mean, pregnancy and things like that. I didn't have a clue, but I had to read up on them very quickly before I could be the teacher. There was doing this. We see a teacher and we don't really think about how much trouble they had in getting to the point where they could stand up and talk about a subject. We take it for granted that they come with knowledge and experience. In most cases, in my case, I really did not have that kind of hands-on experience, but I had a lot of wisdom, if you will, acquired from living and seeing patients come and seeing how they were handled and what helped them and what didn't help them. And the same was true working in the pharmacy, where people would come in with all kinds of problems. And usually it wasn't the drug you gave them to sell, but it was the conversation you had with them.
Yeah, I want you to tell us more about that part of it, because you spoke of the conversations and how they would make people feel better. You are a pharmacologist and you have written about stress management and that sort of thing. Would you tell us more about that specialty in your life?
Yes, I was very interested. I became interested in hormones because I had a professor who was a good professor. I mean, and I followed him in a way, and he moved from the School of Pharmacy to the medical school in London, and I was lucky enough that department that he moved to and I followed was going to be headed by a new professor who was a woman. And she was the first woman professor of pharmacology at the University of London. And she happened to be of Greek origin. And she decided we were remotely related. I still to this day don't think that's true, but it doesn't matter. But she was a stunning redhead and brilliant and had discovered all kinds of drugs that are still on the market now. Muscle relaxants that enabled surgery to be done with the muscle relaxed, so the incision was not enormous because the muscle relaxed as you made the incision. You ever thought about that? If the muscle is not relaxed, you have to make a larger incision.
I never even knew anything about that.
Oh, you see, yeah, you learn something.
Absolutely.
And this was her other side, and she had discovered drugs that worked on and lowering blood pressure, which was not.
In terms of that book that you wrote about stress, I know you just mentioned about the hormones and things like that. Would you tell us more about what the contents are of your book, Stress Beyond 50: Tools and Wisdom for a Happier, Longer Life? And then
Well,
you wrote this other book about pain management and those kinds of things, and all this stuff about stress and fitness for seniors. Tell us more about that.
well, my PhD was in stress, and I was one of the first to measure hormones that are secreted during stress, and they're related to what we call steroids. Like you've heard of cortisone and prednisone when you have a pain, or with you know those drugs were discovered then, and I was lucky enough to be one of the first, who tested them in rats. Would you believe?
Uh-huh.
Uh, it wasn't very glamorous, but I had to try it on something. And and then I developed a method to measure stress, measuring this hormone that stimulates cortisone. And I had this technique, but I needed fresh blood. I took the blood from a person who was presumably stressed and injected it intravenously into a rat. And then the rat responded, and I measured the response, which gave me a measure of the stress in the person's blood. So I was trying to find some humans who were stressed, but with a kind of a standardized kind of stress. And it's not easy. Everybody's stress is different.
Okay.
And my compound was not very stable. My hormone was not very stable. I had to work quickly, and I discovered with this one guy who was a psychiatrist, and who at the time was using electric shock therapy
Mm-hmm.
for mental conditions. And I thought, wow, you can standardize the electric shock and therefore have a repeatable, standardized stimulus or stress. And is the response analogous to the stimulus?
Yeah.
Can you actually measure what's in the blood by looking at the blood of this patient that gets the electric shock? And so what happened was that this guy, the psychiatrist, hospital was at the other side of London. And he used to have to administer the electric shock, then draw the blood, get in a cab or a car, dash across London, and come to me, who's waiting there with my rat anesthetized, waiting for the injection. Yeah, nobody believes these stories.
I believe it.
It was true. And we got to measure in humans an reliable increase to a stimulus that increases and measures the stress the person was going under.
And
And
so
yeah,
readers today that take a look in your books will be able to read about stress management or what have you. And
yes.
so what are some of the things that are your takeaways that you can share with people today about how to manage their stress and why?
Well, stress is both a friend and an enemy. And it depends on how we see it, how we, if you come, are you a friend or are you an enemy? Well, I get an impression of you more or less. Probably you're a friend, but you don't know until I can get some other measurements of situational reactions, and that's what happens with stress. Stress can be a friend in which you thrive because you're excited and your imagination is stimulated and your feelings are your sensory, your feelings are magnified. Or it can be the enemy that makes you miserable. Woe is me.
Whoa.
Woe is me. So how you see stress makes a whole lot of difference in how you react to it, and whether it's a friend or it's an enemy. So you have to step back and look at the situation and say, okay, is this a threat or is this a helpful situation? Can I learn? Can I use it, or am I gone? Do I give up and say, I give in and not go anywhere? and give up and quit. And that's true in life of all the situations we find ourselves in. They can either be exciting or they can be horrible experiences, depending on how we, if we step back and we look at it, we say, well, is this potentially good, depending on how I treat it, or is it going to be harmful to me or harmful to other people? And this is the basics of my philosophy of stress, is that the stimulus and how we perceive a stimulus, is it a threat or is it a friend, makes all the difference in how we respond and how we survive and thrive, as opposed to be destroyed. So it's not the stress that does this to me. It's how I react to the stress.
That's powerful. Say that again.
It's not the stress that's the enemy. It's how I respond to it that makes the difference between whether it's damaging or stimulating. And I worked with the doctors at the hospital who would give me blood samples from patients with various endocrine disorders, hormone disorders, and they wanted to use them diagnostically in that diagnosis and treatment of the, and I didn't care. I had the experience.
Yeah.
I could show that, the measure meant something and the measure was used. So that's where I was. 2 kids, young, very young, and I didn't know how to drive yet, and going to Columbus, Ohio, as an immigrant, and on a temporary visa.
The rest is history.
NASA, who?
Just one moment on that one. I'm just trying to segue here from one thought to another. You got everything straight, and you were able to just stay right here. And exactly. So the question is, how did NASA? All right, how did NASA get a hold of you?
They hated it because I had gone to NASA hoping they would help me by working at the government agency. And here I come, and they said, oh, yeah, we really can't. And they just didn't want to put themselves out. They could have helped, but they weren't going to stretch themselves for me. And when I came back, and they had no excuse because I could stay, then, of course, they loved having me there. And so I stayed on, and after a period of time, the head of physiology, who was an Englishman, and thought I had a proper degree because I had gotten it in England, was selected to start the first life biological sciences in NASA, which was being set up in California. And he asked me, because of my stress background, if I would go with him. And because what he did is he selected 5 scientists. One was in stress, one was a microbiologist, one was a cardiologist, one was an exercise physiologist, one was a rhythm, circadian rhythm, and 5 scientists. That's what we were. 5 of us started out in California, and we were the core of the science group, starting out at
getting from the stress research to space.
Well, they figured that you sit on top of a rocket, it's got to be a stress. This is human logic.
Tell us more.
The first experiments I did was early on, after John Glenn flew around the Earth a few times, and there I am sitting trying to figure out what research I can do. I wanted to get samples from the astronauts. Well, of course, in those days, it wasn't that easy. And they weren't going for very long. But it happened to be that they had a mission crazy, really, when you stop and think about it. Right after they went around the Earth once, okay, they decided they would go for 14 days. Just how crazy it was. 14 days, 2 astronauts, and that was Gemini 7. And Gemini 7 was in 67. I mean, it was really early days. And I thought, that's great. I'll get my stress information from them. They must be stressed. So I wanted samples from the astronauts, and they looked at me, peculiarly. Who's this woman? Well, what they want samples from us. Well, I couldn't get blood samples, but I could get urine. And boy, did I collect their urine before, during, and after. They were up for 14 days, and we collected all the urine they produced during those 14 days plus. And it was returned, and we measured the cortisol, and as a measure of stress. And before they launched, it's high. Of course, they were excited. And when they landed, it was high because, of course, they were excited.
Right.
But during the mission, it was well below the normal. And they said, oh, Joan, it's got to be a mistake. Not possible. They can't not be stressed during the mission. What have you done wrong? I said, well, we did all the samples together. We got it in both of them, 2 separate human individuals, day in, day out, day in, day out. And I said, there's no way we did something wrong. But this is what the data tells us, that during the mission, it wasn't even just normal, it was way below normal. And that caused a lot of consternation in the space program. They kept it quiet for many years until later on, I did some experiments with airline pilots and others situations where you can see the same situation of low levels if you have a pilot who's a test pilot, okay? And he goes through these crazy missions.
Yeah.
And he comes out and he walks away. He is not stressed during the mission as long as nothing goes wrong. One mission had crosswinds on landing, and his steroids went sky high. Crosswind, I mean, it wasn't even a really dangerous, but they were concerned that something would happen. Crosswinds on landing was the thing. Otherwise, during the mission, it was very, very low. So if it's someone who is trained to control their stress, they control it down. So if you're doing surgery and you've done it 100 times and you're doing one more, are you going to be stressed or are you not going to be stressed? No.
So you had something that you wrote, thinking about what John Glenn wrote a foreword for called the G connection.
Yes.
Is that part of what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was the beginning of the G connection. That the gravity, what gravity does. The other thing that I got out of that was we used to use people lying in bed as the simulation model for being in space. The Russians had, bless them, had discovered that if you have somebody lying in bed, they are not exposed to gravity. Yes, they are. But let me start again. If I am standing on Earth, gravity is pulling head to toe my body downward. If I lie down, it's only pulling across my chest. So the influence of gravity is reduced. And they used that lying in bed as a model to study what it's like to be an astronaut in space. So started using this bed rest model to try and understand what happens in space. And what I saw was that the changes that you saw in people lying, healthy people lying in bed, was it was fascinating because they were like those we see in older people.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, gosh, I can't go and tell them, these astronauts that they're getting old in space. Can you imagine?
No,
These
you can't do that.
these creatures that were the heroes of the time, and tell them they're growing old in space. And
Yeah.
I told a couple of people, and they said, Joan, it's crazy. It's not possible. I said, but this is the results. This is what I see. And then we started measuring changes in space, and sure enough, we got the same changes that we saw in bed rest, we saw in astronauts in space.
Wow.
That are what we would call aging. The loss in bone, the loss in muscle, all the nervous system, the heart gets smaller, the circulation is slower. All the things eventually were shown to be like those of getting old. And of course, the astronauts didn't like it. Can you imagine the heroes and you tell them they're getting old in space?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to go up there, right?
This is fascinating information.
It's ruining it for us. Uh, yeah. And it was just for years before I could persuade them that that was really true. And yes, it's all about gravity, because when you're standing up on Earth, it's pulling head to toe in one direction only. And when you lie down or you go in space where you have no gravity or less gravity, or you're lying down and it's only going across your chest, the changes you see systematically are those we see as we get older.
That is so fascinating. And because I know that you are a woman of faith, and because I know that you're a scientist, you've done the things that you've done over the years, you've written books
I
about
wasn't cooking the results.
it. I want to know what your advice would be to someone that's younger now that wants to pursue a career path like yours.
Well, the people who want to go have a passion, and the passion overrides any damage to their body. Can they do something about it? I think there are ways we can provide gravity in space for them. Exercise doesn't do it. You've got to get a centrifuge that will increase the gravity load, and they can get exposures to gravity throughout their stay. But to date, we don't have I haven't been able to get a centrifuge on the spacecraft. I had a design, I had a patent, and then the Columbia crashed because that was the mission it was going to go on. And I was leaving NASA and it sort of died down. But I pursued the research on the ground, the notion that we need to have on board a centrifuge that can provide them on and off, on and off, on and off. You can ride it and get away, and ride it and get away, and ride and get away. It's a bit like if I sit, I need to stand. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I'm going to get changes. And the changes I get are like aging changes.
And so, do you encourage anybody to pursue a career like the one that you've had?
Yes, because I think we know what we need to do. We're not doing it yet. Because it's been the concept, like Star Trek, of having the spacecraft rotated. So it's far too expensive and extravagant. but you don't need that. You can have, I mean, in fact, I have a photograph of it. We, I had an engineer at Ames, and he cut a plate at the bottom of the floor, and a motor under it that would spin this plate. Now, if you lay on that plate, head in, legs out, you would have gravity pulling your blood to your feet, which is what happens when you stand up. So it mimics standing up, even though you're in space the rest of the time.
Yes.
And if you get that stimulus often enough, which I have found out is like standing up. If you sit a lot, if you stand up every 30 minutes, even for a few minutes, even for a few seconds, the system is told, you're on, you're on, you're on, you're on. It is stimulated as we should be on Earth as we move about.
Stimulated. That's key, because as we mentioned in another book that you wrote about being still and being sedentary and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
that will kill you,
Yeah.
and that movement will keep you going. What's the name of
Well,
that book again?
sitting kills, moving heals.
I'm going to use that in my thinking as I sit in front of the computer and need to get up and move around.
Stand up every 30 minutes. You don't have to stand up a long time. Just a few minutes and sit down again. If you stood up, if people would stand up, I tell them, if you're watching television, every time a commercial comes on, stand up.
It amazes me. It amazes me how the God that I serve has created all of this world and the people that are in it. And all we have to do is use what it is that He's given to us wisely, and we can manage everything within our resources and stay healthy and stay happy and live fruitful lives. Are there any other words of encouragement that you can give us today?
It's a question of being open to seeing the changes, seeing what we do. Ask ourselves the questions. What do we do as the world as the world goes around itself and around the sun? We have night and we have day, and during the day we're up and about, and during the night we lie down and sleep. I mean, this is basic stuff, right?
It's basic stuff. Yeah.
It's basic stuff. Well, if we follow what this does, the cues of standing up and lying down and standing up and lying down and standing up and lying down, that's what we're made to be. I didn't make me. I don't claim to have made me. Somebody made me. Somebody made you. Somebody made everybody. But if I defy that, and I lie down all day and don't go anywhere, and I drink and I say whatever, and I don't move and I don't take advantage of the gifts we're given, the daylight that tells me up, the darkness that tells me lie down. It's all there.
It's all there. The cues are there.
It's just a question of seeing them.
Woo, you have really helped me. So I believe that you have helped our listeners, and use whatever it is that God has allowed us to have and to be, following our passions in life, because we're created, because as you say, we didn't create ourselves. No. Are there any closing words that you'd like to share?
Well, I think the only thing I can say is just trust and be grateful, and don't try and concoct something that isn't there. Just look and see and take it for what it is.
Dr. Joan Vernikos, I am so happy that you've taken the time to be with us and to share the things of your wisdom, your life, your uh, research, and all the expositions that you've given to us. You've given us so many little nuggets. I'm so grateful. And I'd like the audience to just pop into Unboxed on Purpose as often as you can, because we do release our episodes every Thursday. And once I put them up, I don't take them down. So you can find them on the Favored by the Father Ministries YouTube channel. You can find them on our Facebook page, on our LinkedIn page, and most podcast platforms. And I like to share that we can be like butterflies that float out of boxes that try to confine us. And we're thinking now about what she said about that G connection, that gravity. But as we evolve, we can float, fly, flutter freely, coming out of boxes of confinement, understanding with eyes wide open that the Holy Spirit can advance us to immeasurable and lofty levels in the Lord. I want you to fulfill your purpose. I want you to remain favored by the Father. Join us next week for more stimulating conversations, refreshing your purpose for which you were divinely created. God bless you. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you very much.